Hello, my name's Clare Norman, professional certified coach, mentor coach, and coach supervisor. And I really hope that you will engage with me in a few experiments today. The value in this session is not all about how I show up, it's also about how you show up. So what do you need right now to put in place to be able to wring the most value out of this session? Take a moment just to get yourself ready, willing and able to focus on this session today. Perhaps take a deep breath, perhaps a stretch, perhaps drink some water, rehydrate, whatever it is for you. I encourage you to get fully present here today. So in the course of my work as a mentor coach for the ICF, I've observed and given feedback on over 700 hours of observed coaching. And that's for over 200 coaches. I watch their coaching in action, either live or recorded. And that's what distinguishes it from supervision, by the way, which is self-reported. With mentor coaching, there is nowhere to hide because we are being observed, we're being given feedback against those ICF competencies, and it brings such rich learning. It's really been a privilege to support and challenge those coaches to sharpen their edge so that they can enable their thinkers to think. But if I step back for a moment and talk to you a little about my definition of coaching as context for what we're going to be talking about today. I see it as a joint endeavour to discover new thinking that moves the thinker forward. A joint endeavour to discover new thinking that moves the thinker forward. So with that definition in mind, that new thinking as our end goal, and with the ICF competencies as the benchmark, I began to notice some patterns in coaches' coaching, patterns that were not particularly serving the thinker's thinking. And I started to get curious. What were people saying to us, either explicitly or implicitly, at those times in our lives that led us to these habits? So roles such as child, pupil, worker, partner, coach in training, these all seem to be habits that we learned in our life roles from parents, teachers, our peers, our managers, our culture, our faith, our ethnicity, our coach trainers. I noticed, for example, that our parents taught us that it is rude to interrupt. That may be so in normal conversation, but in coaching, it can be of service to interrupt their storytelling to check whether it's useful to them to say it out loud. And I'll say a bit more about that later. I also noticed, as another example, that teachers taught us to be logical and to follow a set path to problem solving. Yet our much less logical intuition can play such a powerful part in bringing new insights to the thinker. So these scripts, they served us well at one point in our lives, and perhaps they continue to serve us well outside of coaching. We can feel compassion towards those original neural pathways that were created, but it's time to rewire the things that we have learned through work and life, removing those old scripts so that we can be extraordinary coaches. So I'd like to invite you into a little experiment. So if you're able, may I ask you to stand up? And if you can't stand up, then perhaps raise a hand. And yes, I know you are watching this on pre-recorded video. So the temptation will be to say, no, I'm not going to do this exercise. Claire can't see me. But please do, for your own sake, for your engagement, and also to create some insights for you about some of these scripts that might be getting in your way. So hopefully you're all standing now, or you've got your hand up. Stay standing or keep your hand up if you hesitate to interrupt your thinker. Stay standing if you tend to use the expression, tell me more about that. Stay standing if you feel that your fixer tendency or your rescuer sometimes drives the way that you coach. Stay standing if you feel awkward about introducing drawing or movement into your coaching. Stay standing if you sometimes run over time because you feel that you're so close to a breakthrough. You just need to get that extra little bit in. Stay standing if you want to add value by giving recommendations to your thinker. If you're still standing, that is a lot of scripts that you're holding on to from past lives. And these are just some of the things that can get in the way of our thinkers' growth. Some of it's not rocket science. So, for example, we know that leading questions that come from our rescuer mindset are not a good thing to use. And yet we are not always conscious about our habits until someone else observes us coaching and points them out. So I plant a seed right here and now about investing in mentor coaching. Mentor coaching is for life, not just for credentialing. I'll say that again. Mentor coaching is for life, not just credentialing. So being observed as you coach and discussing how you show up really allows you to become conscious to those habits, to shine a light on your blind spots and make some small tweaks in your coaching that can actually make a really big difference to your thinkers. And I know that you all want to be the best coaches you can be. So this idea of making marginal gains will be useful to you. I'm fascinated by marginal gains, taking a leaf out of Formula One driver's book, where every second counts, and they're trying to shave off those seconds. So I'm trying to figure out what are the marginal gains that we can make in coaching, not to shave off time, although in some instances it could be about giving maximum time to the thinker to think, but much more to create the best thinking environment for them. So everything that we do or say as coaches has an impact on their thinking environment. And I'm actually writing a whole book about these marginal gains, but today let's focus on just a few of those that I've come across as I've been observing coaches as they coach. So let's start with things that our parents taught us that we need to unlearn to be a great coach. They taught us it's rude to interrupt. So we've already mentioned this one. And of course, that was the right thing to teach us, because as children, we would interrupt in the midst of a conversation with somebody else. We'd want our own needs to be met. Mummy, come over here, come and see this. It would be all about us. And so we've got our mother or our father or both of their voices in our heads telling us it is rude to interrupt. And that makes it really difficult for us to coach as coaches to interrupt. And I know that one of the PCC markers says the coach shall not interrupt unless there is a stated reason to do so. And there are reasons to interrupt. So our thinkers need us to interrupt if it enables them to move away from known thinking towards new thinking. So remember what I said at the beginning about the definition is moving our thinkers towards new thinking. But if they're storytelling, if they're giving us context, if they're going over old ground to fill us in, that is known to them already. It's quite possibly something they've told their mates or their mum over a glass of wine or over a coffee. And they know it all already. They've told this story 1,000 times, maybe. They don't need to say it in coaching in order for them to know it. They know it already. So we have permission, and we can ask for permission in our session contracting at the beginning to interrupt in service of their new thinking. So just for a moment, I'm going to ask you to write down 3 phrases that you could use to interrupt your thinker. Yes, do it now. I'll give you a few moments. Don't get sidetracked. Focus on the task in hand. 3 phrases that feel authentic to you as ways to interrupt your thinker. So I said, for example, that I often ask in the session contracting phase, may I have your permission to interrupt you in service of new thinking? So that's the first inkling that we may interrupt, and that enables them to not feel as though we're being rude by interrupting. We're doing it for a reason. But then I might say, in the midst of their storytelling, or in fact, even before they get into storytelling, they might say, let me give you a bit of context. And at that point, I'll say, is it useful to you to say the context? Please don't feel you need to say it out loud for my benefit. So they make a conscious choice even before they get into story. If they do get into story, things like, may I interrupt you? If I might interrupt you for a moment, may I suggest that we take a pause there? That might be a little bit directive. But then following it up with, it sounds as though you might know this already. If so, please don't feel like you need to fill me in on the detail. Is it useful to you to say it out loud? Or you might say, if you know this already, how do we get you from known thinking to new thinking? Or you might say, is this giving you new insights? And if they say no, so where do you need to go? Where do we need to go in order to get new insights? There are lots and lots and lots of ways of interrupting. What is the essence of this story? What's the learning from this story? What's the bottom line here? But find words that feel natural to you. And you've already started to do that by writing down your 3 phrases. And it might feel uncomfortable to start with, but don't stop doing it because you feel you hear your mother or father's voice in your head saying it's rude to interrupt. It will become easier over time, and particularly when you start to see how much further you get in a session if you can use the time for new thinking rather than known thinking. So let's move on. Another thing that our parents taught us was to try our hardest. And yes, again, we understand why our parents would want us to do that, and also school would encourage us to try hard too. But too often I notice that coaches taking too much responsibility on their shoulders for pushing the thinker forwards. They're trying too hard. Perhaps they're looking for the perfect question, and there's a hint there really is no such thing as a perfect question. Or they're feeling the pressure to drive to a solution by the end of a session. Or they're leading where the session goes. Or they're taking the burden of thinking that should be firmly in the thinker's court. And the clue is in the title. They are the thinker, not you. So the harder you work, the less hard the thinker will think. So the mindset that you need here is very different to trying hard yourself. Nobody ever promised that coaching was an easy option. It isn't. So coaching requires effort on the part of the thinker. It requires their full participation. It requires them to take responsibility for the hard work of thinking, delving underneath the surface, going beyond the obvious. And yes, you will be helping them to do those things, but you won't be trying nearly as hard as them. It's 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration, as Thomas Edison once said. So here are some ideas of how you can try less hard and enabling them to think hard. One is to spend time getting the question for the session really clear before moving on. So just as Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question. But once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. Now, I'm not saying that we will spend 55 minutes on contracting, but sometimes we need to, because they're very unclear on what the question is. So spend as long as you need on clarifying what is the question that we are working on today. And then also, when you're not sure where to take the session next, don't try so hard. Don't make the decision yours. Recontract. So what do you know now that you didn't know at the beginning would be your first question. And then once they've answered that, so with that in mind, where do we need to explore next? So you're enabling them to think hard about the agenda and how they spend their time. So this keeps the responsibility for the direction of the conversation firmly with the thinker. So what would it be like if you didn't try quite so hard? How might you hand the reins over to them? This next one, I think, is pretty obvious, actually. Our parents taught us not to be selfish, and especially to the girls, they taught us to be the caregiver. When actually we know, and hopefully we've learned even more throughout the last 18 months, that we need to pay attention to our own self-care so that we have the capacity to work with others. Just think for a moment, how do you rate yourself on that? Let's look at things that we learned from school that we need to unlearn to be a great coach. First of all, our schools taught us we should finish what we started. Actually, our thinkers need us to help them to make any progress, breaking the stalemate. Any progress begets progress. So Teresa Amabile and Steve Kramer found that any progress is good progress. People feel motivated to carry on when they recognize that they have made progress, even small progress. So we are enabling them to break the stalemate that they find themselves in, to make just some progress. We don't need to resolve everything. We don't need to finish what we've started. So imagine a beaver dam. If we pull out one stick from that beaver dam, we will allow a trickle of water through the dam. That trickle will start to push out more sticks. And as each stick floats away downstream, there's another gap for a little more water, and then a little more water, and then a little more water until the dam has been completely washed away. And that's how we should be approaching coaching, as though our job in the session is to help our thinker to remove just one stick of the dam. If they can remove that one stick, then they will continue to remove obstacles after the coaching is over, because progress begets progress. So just stop for a moment, and I'd like you to stand up, find a space in the room where you can visualize yourself and just get into a space of helping your thinker to make progress without the need to finish. So yes, again, I know this is a pre-recording, so don't shirk this. Try it out. It makes such a big difference for you to really visualize and embody what this feels like, to be okay with making any progress and letting go of the need to finish what you started. So breathe that in for a moment. Really imagine what it's like to let go of the need to finish, of the need to wrap up, of the need to tie up all the loose ends. That's trying too hard. So instead, imagine yourself helping them to make any progress, taking one stick out of the dam. And just ask yourself, what does that feel like to have that mindset instead of the mindset of needing to finish? All right, come and sit down again, and we shall move on. So our schools taught us that more is more. But actually, our thinkers need us to stay out of the way because less is more. So when I observe coaches, I often hear them parroting everything that they heard, when that just gets in the thinker's way because it takes up their thinking space. So I hear stacked questions as well, because the coach doesn't think that the first one was clear enough, when in fact it was perfectly clear. In essence, I'm hearing coaches taking space that they don't need to take, perhaps because they believe that they need to insert more of themselves. They really don't need to. You don't need to. Stay out of the way. Get into this mentality of less is more. And I encourage you to listen back to your coaching recordings and see how much you insert yourself. So some transcript services will tell you what percentage of time you talk in comparison to your thinker. That could be really enlightening for you to see what that balance is and whether you need to shift it. And if you want to find out how to get more from listening to your recordings, please do get in touch with me, and I'll give you my details at the end of the session here. I have created a job aid about how to get the most out of listening back to your recordings. So something else that our teachers taught us was, I must understand this. When actually, our thinkers need us to realize that we don't need to understand as long as they do. It might seem counterintuitive, but I don't need to understand what my thinker is talking about. I've coached many people who talk in a language or with jargon that is unfamiliar to me, acronyms, industry specialisms. I don't know the meaning of those, and I don't need to know the meaning of those because they already do. If I were to stop and ask them to explain that, that's me filling myself in rather than getting them to new thinking. You see, there's a real theme here about getting to new thinking. So I even know of a coach who has coached in English with a translator, but the translator only translated from English into the foreign language, not the other way around. So the coach did not understand anything that the thinker said, but could still ask questions that moved the thinker's thinking forward. Amazing, right? And that says that we can do the same, even if we are speaking the same actual language. We don't need to understand everything that they say. And particularly given that we're not there to come up with solutions for them, we don't need all those details. We're not trying to join dots. We're not diagnosing. So shift that mindset to one where you don't need to understand as long as they do. Let's move on to things that we learned from work that we need to unlearn to be a great coach. First of all, our working environment taught us to act like a service provider. So, how can I help you? What do you need from me? I'll get that to you as soon as possible. Don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. I could go on, and I'm sure you have lots of examples of how your working environment shaped you as a service provider. But it's not very useful in coaching. The trouble is, we do have a problem in coaching in that we sell it as a service. One person or organization buying from another, and that sets it up in a way that doesn't serve the thinker. Unfortunately, when they see it as a service, they expect subconsciously to be served, and they come as a consumer. The most valuable service we can provide to them, though, is to get them to think, to build and sustain their own thinking muscles. And as we've said, that might feel like hard work to them, and it's not what they expect from a service provider, to make things hard for them. But we need to move to being a partner. And I'm not saying that our thinkers want us to be the partner, but they need us to be a partner. So right from the start of coaching, we need to speak of this as a partnership, to act as though it's a partnership. We're traveling into the unknown together. So first things first, let's move away from calling them a client, which assumes some kind of service. Let's also not call them the coachee, as this assumes that we are doing something to them. They are having coaching done to them, rather than them being in partnership. So if you were to partner rather than being a service provider, how would you be different? Things like asking them where they want to go, contracting with them in the first place. Where do they want to start? How shall we do this work together? There are all sorts of ways of showing that we are in partnership with them. And I challenge you to think further about this, to put on that partner hat, to change your mindset, and to notice in your recordings, when are you being a service provider and when are you actually showing up as a partner? So we've kind of touched on this one as well. Come with solutions, not questions. It's tied into being a service provider. But we need only our presence in coaching. We need to be okay with not knowing, not coming with solutions. This is a hard habit to break, a really hard habit to break. And it does take a real shift in mindset to get out of that solution orientation. And I'm sure some of you have noticed that for yourselves. So we're not problem solving on behalf of the thinker. We're not cooking the recipe for them. We're not even having a recipe in the first place, but we're co-creating a new recipe by coming into the coaching space in a state of not knowing. So, yeah, see what it feels like to be in that place of not knowing. Again, it may feel very uncomfortable to start with, but the more you practice this, the easier it will become. The other thing that our workplace taught us was to work at pace, or another thing that it taught us. There are lots of other things that we have learned from work, but to work at pace. And yes, of course, that's normal and usual in the workplace. And it's all about productivity. It's getting more done in less time. But coaching is not about being more productive. It's about evoking awareness. So we need to get to what matters most at pace, but then slow down to explore. So Michael Bungay-Stanier pointed out that good coaches tend to meander and take time to get to what matters most. But great coaches get there much sooner. And so they can spend the rest of the time working on what matters most. So when I talked about shaving off time as a marginal gain, this is one place where we can do it by getting really clear in our session contract at the beginning. What is it that matters most here that we are working on? So what we're learning here is that getting to action is not what matters most. Getting to transformation is what matters most. Getting underneath the surface, exploring the territory such that the route to resolution is grounded in what matters most, beliefs and values. Let's take us to things we learned from coach training that we need to unlearn to be a great coach. And sorry to those people who run coach training if you teach any of these things, but maybe there's something to think about here, or you might argue with me, which is fine too. We could have a great discussion about it. But our coach training has often taught us to sit and talk. And actually, our thinkers need us to use all of their senses to access new learning. So sitting still can in itself cause stuckness. The lack of physiological movement can lead to a lack of forward movement in thinking. This is especially true if the thinker is in the same seat that they sit in for their normal work, where they do their normal thinking. That's where the stuckness was created. And so they're going to stay stuck unless you help them to move out of that seat. And also, some research around standing. Students who worked at standing desks were 12% more engaged than their seated colleagues. Now, okay, engagement doesn't necessarily equate with being able to think better, but I think there's something in that about standing and engagement. But then also walking. According to research from Stanford University, people's creative output increases by an average of 60%, 60% when walking. That's an astounding difference. And it really does suggest that we should walk every time we coach, not just some of the time. So those of you who are already doing walking coaching, you'll know this already, the creativity that it sparks as people are walking forward. But then there are other things that we need to access around the senses to access new learning. So bodily senses, what's going on in the body, the kinesthetic stuff. There might be some naturalist intelligences. So how can we use nature and our thinkers' sense of nature? All sorts of ways that we can access new learning. It might be drawing, as we talked about at the beginning. It might be laying out a constellation in front of them so that they can see the picture in front of them. And that's so much easier to see what's going on than simply talking about it. So use all of their senses to access new learning. Get over this sitting and talking. And by the way, for those of you who might argue, but that's really difficult when you're working virtually. I do it all over Zoom, accessing all of their senses, getting them up, moving around, moving to a new place, getting them to use the sights, the sounds, the smells, the objects around them, use their body to access new thinking. All of these things I can still do in this venue. So think about how you can start to access new learning through all of their senses and get out of this perspective of sitting and talking. Something else that our coach training organizations have sometimes taught us is to say, tell me more. Now, I would contend that this invites story. It invites context. It invites filling me in on the detail. It doesn't invite them to think new thinking for themselves. So the intention is good of tell me more, trying to get them to carry on talking, but actually the impact of it, the effect that it has in terms of them going back into storytelling, does not promote new thinking. So we need to ask questions like, what does that mean to you? That will get underneath the surface of whatever it is that they've just said, or something along those lines. I'm not saying that's the only replacement for tell me more, but think about how you might switch from tell me more to something that invites new thinking and deeper thinking, because that is our job, not to go over old ground, but to get to new thinking. So, to pull all of this together, this is everything on one slide. There's a lot there, but as I said at the beginning, this is just the tip of the iceberg of all of the things that I've been noticing as I've been mentor coaching, watching people coaching. There are so many marginal gains that we could make that I'm pulling together into a book, as I said. So watch this space on that. But do connect with me. Clare at clarenormancoachingassociates.com. Please note there's no I in Clare. I'd love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn. So there's my LinkedIn link. Please do come over and let me know that you've come to me through this presentation. And as I said at the beginning, let me know if you would like the job aid on how to get the most out of listening to your recordings. As I said, many of these observations today came from the work that I do as a mentor coach, observing coaches as they coach and providing them with feedback. But if you want to do it on your own, then this job aid will be able to help you to do that. So just get in touch if you want it. And if you want to learn more about mentor coaching, come and have a conversation with me here, either on LinkedIn or via email. I would love to chat more with you about marginal gains, about things we need to unlearn, or about mentor coaching itself. So thank you all. I have enjoyed being here with you today. I hope you have followed along with the little experiments that we've been playing with, and that this has been useful to you. So thank you.